Craft Day at the annual Autumn Leaf Festival is by far my favorite day of the year. It's the day I get to do two of my favorite activities. I get to carve and I get to hang out with 50, 60,000 of my closest friends, or soon to be friends. In recent years, I've been doubly blessed on that day because I get to share it with my son Carl, who is a gifted painter artist. But at some point during the day, Carl and I will have this conversation. It may be prompted by someone from the crowd, or it may be just coming out of the blue. But Dad, you're just about giving this stuff away. I go, I know. But if I didn't, it would just clutter the house up. I'd put it in a box and pile it somewhere. Isn't it better that people get to enjoy it, that it brings a smile to their face, or even better that somehow they remember me when they look at it, or just find some enjoyment? Oh, don't get me wrong, I enjoy the money, but that's not the point. And the more I think about it, there's something kind of biblical about that. The prophet Isaiah tells a marvelous story. Some have called it even the centerpiece of the Old Testament. It's called the Song of the Vineyard. It's kind of in microcosm, the history of Israel. In it we hear God plants a vineyard, tends it, puts a fence around it, protects it. It bears wonderful fruit. But after a while, God goes to the vineyard and finds nothing but wild grapes. How did this happen? Well, in the end, he tears down the walls, and it's overrun by wild animals, and eventually the vineyard is destroyed. So, what's the story about? Well, if you know your biblical history, it's pretty obvious. It's the story of Israel. How God gave them a gift at a time when they were nothing more than 12 tribes wandering in the wilderness. He gives them the law, the Torah, a way to begin to see themselves together as community, as one people. Kind of a set of boundaries, a guideline for living together in community. A community that will eventually become a nation. And we call that nation Israel. And if we know our history, as time goes on, problems arise and the nation is split. The northern kingdom gets destroyed by the Assyrians. The southern kingdom is overrun by the wild animals from the Babylons. So what happens? Well, that gift, that Torah, eventually becomes not a guideline, but the rule. A way to keep others, not like them, out. And once the nation begins to do that, it starts to internally collapse and start feeding on itself. And eventually, it's nothing but a pack of wild dogs left loose in the vineyard. And there will be nothing left. Matthew, in his gospel, includes a parable of Jesus that parallels this quite well. One can argue it's the story of the relationship of the Jews and the early Christians. Once again, the parable speaks of an owner who plants a vineyard, and it does quite well. He goes off to a foreign country, sends servants back to collect the revenues. The servants are mistreated, beaten. He sends more servants. They end up killing them. Finally, he says, I'll send my son. They will respect him. and they beat and kill him. And we recognize that in this we're hearing the story of Jesus and what fate awaits him, the cross. Christians these days really seem to be getting into Matthew. It's right up there with Leviticus and the first chapter of Romans. I hear it quoted all the time. As one person told me, I really love Matthew because it puts the screws to those people. We all know them. Yeah, we know them. I don't know about putting the screws to them, but I know that by the time I finish this year of Matthew, I'm going to be very depressed. Because I recognize that if I measure my life against Jesus' teachings, the new Torah, the new law, I'm screwed. I don't cut it. I've messed up far too many times. My track record is not good. My only hope is that when I come to that judgment seat, that wonderful little piece in chapter 24, I got a merciful judge. And thankfully, that's what Matthew reminds us, that we do have a God that is slow to anger, abounding in mercy and loving kindness. A God who in the end continues to bless us with his grace and forgiveness, that we might have life. That when we stand before the judgment seat, it will be mercy, not wrath, not condemnation. As such, then, Matthew makes it very clear that it's our task as the people of God to try to model that kind of mercy and grace in our actions. If we have trouble visualizing what that looks like, again, chapter 24 is really enlightening. It reminds us that we are called to see in the neighbor the face of Jesus. To recognize their needs. And if we see each other having the face of Jesus, wouldn't that change how we live together in community? And perhaps we would be more compelled to keep some of that Torah, to recognize the gift that God has given us in the care of the stranger, the orphan, the widow, the thirsty, the hungry, the imprisoned, the lonely. Just maybe. Not that we may earn our way into justice, but that we may continue to see the face of Jesus. A good and gracious face in the midst of this wonderful vineyard that God has planted.